Howdy folks, Jambareeqi here, and welcome to another episode of Jambareeqi Orange, the show where I let my patrons decide what I review. The options for this episode included The Swan Princess 3, Batman Begins, 100% Wolf, Flora and Ulysses, Wrong Turn 2003, and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. They chose Batman Begins. As a child, Bruce Wayne developed a phobia of bats. One night his parents took him to an opera, but the performance triggered his fears and he asked to leave the theatre. Once outside, the Waynes were threatened by an armed thief, and Bruce's parents were shot right in front of him. At their funeral, he blamed himself for their deaths. Years later, Bruce meets a man called Henry Deckard, who introduces him to Ra's al Ghul and his League of Shadows. Bruce trains under Deckard's wing, learning various martial arts with his help. However, after learning the League's practices when it comes to defeating criminals, Bruce betrays the man who trained him and goes on his own journey. Using his inherited fortune, he creates a superhero alter ego called Batman, and starts to investigate the mystery of Dr. Jonathan Crane, an Arkham psychologist who has ties with the Gotham mob and is experimenting with psychotropic drugs on his patients. Bruce later learns that Deckard is still alive, turning out to be the real Ra's al Ghul. The man before was just a decoy. Deckard has been working with Dr. Jonathan Crane on a plan to use the hallucinogens to spike Gotham's water supply and send the city into a self-destructive frenzy. Can Batman save Gotham from his old master and the Doctor who is using his profession for evil? After the critical failure of Batman and Robin, the cinematic legacy of the Caped Crusade was left with a bitter reputation. The backlash was that intense and scathing. Audiences were mainly upset that director Joel Schumacher had made Batman look silly, feeling that the Dark Detective deserved a much more dignified portrayal. So when Warner Bros. Decided to make another Batman movie, they opted to satisfy DC fans with something more mature and serious. A film that wouldn't resemble Schumacher's Batman movies in any shape or form. They hired director Christopher Nolan, who was best known at the time for films like Insomnia, Memento, and The Following. Nolan basically reimagines Batman in a more down-to-earth and grounded world. One much less like Tim Burton's fairy tale vision or Joel Schumacher's campy cartoon, and something more close to home. Now, I'm personally not a fan of superhero films that take themselves too seriously, because they can often end up being boring, but I found a lot of intrigue in seeing how Batman Begins recontextualizes comic book cinema. This film is very intricate when it comes to its authentic details within its story. Bruce's gadgets, armor, and vehicle are all introduced with practical or scientific exposition, so we're not left stretching our imagination too much or wondering how Bruce avoids certain problems in the field. Arkham Asylum also looks like a normal, typical hospital on the surface, while its darker side is hidden underground, making us believe more in the idea of a mental asylum being quite sinister behind closed doors. Not to mention, Dr. Crane could have had a fantastical or cartoony explanation for his mind tricks. The temptation would have been very easy, but they've been grounded with the concept of psychotropic hallucinogens. While the illusions the toxin creates are very horror-centric and super strange, drugs like this do really exist, so it's not a far-fetched concept. These are just a few examples of how much work was put into shifting Batman's comic book universe into something more tangible and relatable. However, this isn't to say that the film doesn't have any comedy, because at the end of the day, humor is an important part of realism. Why? Well, because humans have a habit of cracking jokes in social situations, or they'll use comedy to handle scary things or stress. Batman Begins, as dark as it is, knows this for a fact. These jokes aren't laugh-out-loud hilarious, but rather very dry and casual, because they're written to sound like offhand comments that everyday people would make.
Bats are nocturnal.
Bats may be, but even for billionaire playboys, 3 o'clock is pushing it.
The style of comedy fits very naturally into the tone of the film, plus adds humanity and personality to the characters to make them feel more alive. The main point of this movie, though, is to explore the rich history of Bruce Wayne and the origin story for Batman as a superhero. Like most Christopher Nolan films, Batman Begins uses non-linear storytelling to intercut between timelines, in this movie's case, Bruce's early years and the modern present day. This helps to weave together the two parts of Bruce. At the very centre of Bruce Wayne's character is the trauma that he went through as a child, from witnessing the murder of his parents as a kid and how he blamed himself for their deaths, to the time he fell down a well and a colony of flying bats terrified the crap out of him. However, the movie doesn't simply use flashbacks to quickly explain Bruce's reasoning for becoming Batman, because that would rush over his very complicated journey. These moments were the seeds planted for his darkest emotions, not the basic backstory for the Caped Crusader. As Bruce got older, he was forced to confront decisions about his life, and these choices would obviously be influenced by his trauma. When given the chance to kill the man who murdered his parents, he missed said opportunity when someone else fired the shot. But he also learned how pointless revenge is. Then after training with the League of Shadows years later, they put him to the test by asking him to kill a murderer to show his commitment to their ideology. But he's learned that killing your enemies is fruitless.
You can't believe in this.
Ra's al Ghul rescued us from the darkest corners of our own hearts. What he asks in return is the courage to do what is necessary.
I will go back to Gotham and I will fight men like this, but I will not become an executioner.
Thus, Batman is born, a martial artist vigilante motivated to help Gotham become a safer place. Bruce has turned his bloodlust for vengeance into a fight for justice, transformed his fear of bats into a weapon of his own against criminals, and is now using his inherited wealth to phone gadgets to defend the city that his father loved. Everything has come full circle by this point. But I think it would be very unfair to say that Bruce became the man he is on his own, because his loved ones played a part in shaping him into the best man he could be. Alfred, the Wayne Mansion butler, is more than the household servant. He's family to Bruce. Alfred is very supportive of Bruce's superhero endeavours, but also wants his master to be safe. Plus frequently reminds him about his legacy.
You're getting lost inside this monster of yours.
I'm using this monster to help other people just like my father did.
For Thomas Wayne, helping others wasn't about proving anything to anyone, including himself.
Bruce hasn't just inherited a large sum of money, but also his father's mission to restore Gotham through charity and invention. If Bruce wants to overcome his grief, holding his parents' values close to his heart is one way of doing so. And Alfred is the person to help Bruce retain that sentiment.
The Wayne legacy is more than bricks and mortars.
I wanted to save Gotham. I failed.
Why do we fall, sir? So that we can learn to pick ourselves up.
Then there's Rachel, Bruce's childhood best friend and possible love interest. She more than anyone understands Bruce's history, both his dark side and his capability to do good. So she's more than qualified to push him to be his best, whether that means severely scolding him for almost assassinating his parents' killer.
Your father would be ashamed of you.
Or reminding him that our actions define who we are.
Deep down, you may still be that same bright kid you used to be. But it's not who you are underneath. It's what you do that defines you.
She's also quite a hero herself, because she's a lawyer who prioritizes just sentences over everything, and won't be easily bribed like other attorneys in Gotham. Heck, in the finale, she even gets to defend a lost little boy from bloodthirsty criminals, despite being terrified for her own life. Bruce's superhero career also helps him to make some new friends, people who believe in his potential and know that he has great intentions as a vigilante. While a part of them fears his Batman identity, they also see him as a beacon of hope for the crime-ridden Gotham, like Lieutenant Gordon, who serves as a middleman between Bruce and the law. Someone who is willing to break the rules because he believes more in this superhero than his own precinct, which has a corrupt cop on the force. There's a real charm to how these two grow a kindred respect for each other, a friendship founded on a shared passion for justice and saving lives.
Commissioner Love set up a massive task force to catch you.
He thinks you're dangerous. What do you think?
I think you're trying to help. But I've been wrong before.
There's also Lucius Fox, the head of research at Wayne Enterprises, who risks his job to help Bruce be fully equipped on the field. He never judges or questions Bruce's intent because he knew his father and what he would have taught his son.
Look, I'd rather Mr. Earl didn't know about me borrowing.
Mr. Wayne, the way I see it, all this stuff is yours anyway.
Lucius is also a very helpful character to the audience, because he vividly explains the mechanics and advantages of every single Batman gadget, vehicle, or costume piece.
Nomex survival suit for advanced infantry. Kevlar bi-weave, reinforced joints.
Tear resistant.
This sucker will stop a knife.
bulletproof.
Anything but a straight shot.
The Batman movies are renowned for their villains, so how does Batman Begins use the Rogues Gallery? Dr. Jonathan Crane is honestly one of the scariest comic book villains put to screen. We're supposed to trust people like Dr. Crane to look after vulnerable patients, especially in a day and age when the mental health system has improved dramatically. That's what makes him so terrifying, the fact that he's slimily using his qualifications to his own advantage, yet has no remorse for doing so. It honestly horrifies me to see him being so calm and collected as he takes advantage of his power dynamic as a doctor. Of course, he's quite intense when he becomes the Scarecrow too, especially when his victims are high on psychotropic hallucinogens. But I personally find him to be much creepier without his mask, because he has the face of an everyday normal therapist. And it's just easier to resonate with that compared to what horror effects can conjure up.
Would you like to see my mask? I use it in my experiments. Probably not very frightening to a guy like you, with these crazies. You can't stand it.
So when did the nut take over the nut house?
Let's not forget Ra's al Ghul, the man who taught Bruce Wayne how to fight, and tried to shape Bruce into a soldier for his own army. Not only does he have a strong history with our hero, making their dynamic as hero and villain have a personal connection, but Ra's is also what Batman could have become. Ra's is a character who has all the foundations of a hero, as he's someone who hates criminals and wants to defeat evil, but he takes this energy into a direction that makes him yet another villain for Gotham. His attempt to sanitize Gotham by forcing it into a self-destructive battle royale is a very oppressive evil plan. It's a terrorist attack that's disturbing to watch unfold as local authorities struggle to keep the peace.
This is Gordon.
What the hell is going on in there?
We need reinforcements. Attack team, SWAT,
Gordon! All the city's riot police are on the island with you.
There's also something deeply fascinating about watching Bruce and Ra's debate over moral ethics, creating a philosophical conflict that bites hard both ways.
Crime, despair. This is not how man was supposed to live. The League of Shadows has been a check against human corruption for thousands of years. We sacked Rome, loaded trade ships with plague rats, burned London to the ground. Every time a civilization reaches the pinnacle of its decadence, we return to restore the balance.
Gotham isn't beyond saving. Give me more time. There are good people here.
To conclude, Batman Begins is a solid superhero origin movie about the power of channeling anger and fear into justice and courage. As a film that set out to be a realistic, grounded Batman movie, I think that it does a fantastic job, because it manages to stay true to the science and reality of superheroism, while still being thoroughly entertaining and emotionally complex. So those are my thoughts on Batman Begins. What do you think of this film? Let me know in the comments section below, and don't forget to click that like button. Also, please consider subscribing to my channel. So, what am I going to be reviewing next on Jambareeqi Orange? Well, that's entirely up to my patrons. The options for next episode's poll include Pokemon Heroes, Raya and the Last Dragon, The Dark Knight, Coming to America, King Kong 1933, and Godzilla 1998. That's a pretty awesome selection, right? Now don't forget that you have to be a patron in order to access this poll. What is a patron? Don't worry, I'll explain. This is my Patreon. It's a site for my fans to support me financially on through a monthly basis. Those who donate are called patrons. Patrons can donate as much as they want and are welcome to stop donating anytime. In return for their generosity, patrons are given exciting rewards based on their pledge amount. These rewards include early access to my videos before they go up publicly on YouTube, behind the scenes content, their name in the end credits of my videos, a chance to request a review of anything at all, and much more. Pretty excited to find out what my patrons want me to review next on the show. Cheerio, folks.